Welcome to Capital Catch-Up, your deep dive into the halls of Congress. I am Victor.
And I am Lenny. Today, we are walking you through some of the major legislative proposals, budget frameworks, and policy shifts currently moving through the House and the Senate. We have got a lot of ground to cover, from national defense and consumer safety to historical commemorations and local resource management.
Let us start with a major push in consumer safety and firearm regulation. House Resolution 7499, also known as the Firearms Safety Act of 2025, has been introduced in the House of Representatives by Representative Robin Kelly and a group of co-sponsors. This bill takes a unique approach to gun safety by targeting the legal definition of a consumer product.
That is right, Victor. Under the current Consumer Product Safety Act, firearms are explicitly excluded from being classified as consumer products. House Resolution 7499 would remove that exclusion for pistols, revolvers, and other firearms. By doing so, it would grant the Consumer Product Safety Commission the legal authority to establish and enforce federal safety standards for these weapons.
It is a significant procedural shift. Instead of passing traditional gun control laws, this utilizes an existing regulatory agency to oversee manufacturing and safety specifications. The bill has been referred to the Committee on Energy and Commerce, which will determine whether federal oversight should be extended to firearm manufacturing and safety regulations.
Speaking of broad federal oversight, let us talk about the money. House Concurrent Resolution 14 has been introduced to establish the federal budget framework for fiscal year 2025, while also setting up projections all the way through 2034. For our listeners who might not know, a concurrent resolution is a legislative measure that does not become law itself, but it acts as a binding roadmap for both the House and Senate to guide their spending and revenue decisions.
And this roadmap is highly focused on long-term fiscal discipline. It outlines spending and revenue targets for major areas like national defense, healthcare, Social Security, and infrastructure. But what really stands out is that it mandates at least $2 trillion in spending reductions over the next decade. It also includes mechanisms for reconciliation, deficit-neutral reserve funds, and government deregulation to foster economic growth.
While that budget resolution sets the high-level targets, we are also seeing specific funding bills take shape. For instance, House Resolution 8800 is the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027. This is the massive policy directive that outlines appropriations for the Department of Defense, military construction, and national security activities within the Department of Energy.
This year's National Defense Authorization Act focuses heavily on modernizing our military capabilities while keeping legacy systems in play. It authorizes multi-year procurement for advanced naval vessels and aircraft, but it also places strict limits on retiring older systems, specifically the F-22 fighter jets and MQ-9 Reaper drones.
It also pushes hard into the future of warfare and technology. There are specific provisions targeting technological innovation in quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. Plus, to protect domestic technology, the bill implements safeguards against foreign-controlled robotic systems and foreign research collaboration. It even touches on personnel reforms, adjusting military end strengths, and enhancing the Uniform Code of Military Justice when it comes to sexual misconduct and victim support.
On the domestic side of appropriations, we have House Resolution 9022, which is the Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act for 2027. This bill funds the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of the Interior. It allocates major funding for civil works like river and harbor maintenance, flood and storm damage reduction, and restoring aquatic ecosystems.
There are some very specific local directives in House Resolution 9022, too. It funds the Mississippi River and tributaries, the Central Utah Project, and the Bureau of Reclamation. But it also includes interesting regulatory mandates, like controlling how dredged material is disposed of in Lake Erie, protecting congressional access to project data, and explicitly affirming the right of citizens to possess firearms at water resource projects in accordance with state laws. It is all about maintaining strict fiscal accountability and stopping the Secretary of the Army from deviating from the established budget plans.
Now, let us shift our focus to some of the Senate bills that address historical and social issues. Senate Bill 40 is the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. This bill proposes creating a 13-member commission to examine the history of slavery in the United States and its ongoing legacy of systemic racial and economic discrimination.
This commission would have a very broad mandate, Victor. They would document the historical impacts of slavery, but also subsequent discriminatory practices that followed, such as Jim Crow laws, redlining, and unequal access to education. Crucially, they would look at how these historical factors continue to affect living African Americans today.
And the bill authorizes $12 million for this commission to hold hearings, gather evidence, and ultimately submit a report to Congress. That report would recommend potential remedies, which could include a formal national apology and proposals for reparations, while also looking at international standards for human rights violations.
On the topic of our nation's history, the Senate is also looking at Senate Bill 4828, the Declaration of Independence Reaffirmation Act of 2026. This is a formal legislative gesture to mark the upcoming 250th anniversary of American independence. It formally reaffirms the Declaration of Independence as an organic law of the United States.
By readopting the text, the bill highlights foundational principles like national sovereignty, natural rights, equal citizenship, and government by consent. It is designed to reinforce the legal and historical connection between our founding charter and the Constitution.
Moving back to economic and technological security, let us look at Senate Bill 97, the Securing Semiconductor Supply Chains Act. We all remember the supply chain issues during the pandemic, and this bill aims to address that by boosting domestic semiconductor manufacturing. It directs the Department of Commerce's Select USA program to work with state-level economic development organizations to identify investment barriers and find ways to attract foreign direct investment.
The goal is to bring critical supply chain segments back to U.S. soil or diversify them while strictly ensuring that these investments do not benefit foreign adversaries. And the best part for taxpayers is that this initiative is designed to be budget neutral, meaning the Select USA program has to use its existing resources to get this done.
We also have Senate Bill 2585, the MAP for Broadband Funding Act. This is another effort to improve infrastructure efficiency. It requires the Federal Communications Commission and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration to review the quality and usability of the broadband funding map. Plus, the Government Accountability Office would study interagency collaboration to make sure federal broadband funds are not being fragmented or wasted.
Speaking of infrastructure and scientific tools, the Senate is also looking to protect ocean research through Senate Bill 4822, the Saving the OOI Act of 2026. This bill orders the National Science Foundation to halt any plans to decommission or scale back the Ocean Observatory's initiative instruments. These scientific tools are located off the coasts of Oregon, Washington, Alaska, North Carolina, and in the Irminger Sea. The bill requires full operations to continue until a thorough review is conducted with input from scientific and coastal communities.
Let us look at a few other House bills that focus on everyday safety and community support. House Resolution 1695 is the Guarding Readiness Resources Act. It is a bipartisan bill that changes how the National Guard Bureau handles money reimbursed by states and territories. If a state pays to use military property, that money must go right back into the specific accounts that paid for those costs. And those funds can only be used to repair, maintain, and replace assets used during state active duty.
That keeps those resources dedicated to maintaining operational readiness. We also have House Resolution 6028, the Legislative Branch Agencies Clarification Act. This bill proposes some major administrative restructuring for key legislative branch positions, specifically the Librarian of Congress and the Director of the Government Publishing Office.
Yes, instead of political appointments, these officials would be appointed by a newly defined congressional commission made up of House and Senate leadership and oversight committee members. Their appointments would be based on professional fitness rather than political affiliation, and they can be removed by a majority vote of that leadership. Furthermore, the bill would make the U.S. Copyright Office independent of the Library of Congress, granting the Register of Copyrights independent regulatory powers and establishing a new presidential appointment process for that role based on recommendations from congressional leadership.
Meanwhile, House Resolution 3196, the Improving Helicopter Safety Act of 2025, takes a local approach to safety and noise reduction. It proposes a federal ban on civil helicopter flights within a 20-mile radius of the Statue of Liberty National Monument. The Federal Aviation Administration would have 90 days to enforce this, though there are exemptions for essential flights like law enforcement, medical emergencies, news coverage, and heavy lift infrastructure maintenance.
We also have 3 other newly introduced House bills to watch. House Resolution 9359 would amend the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008 to allow the government to reissue Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, or SNAP benefits, to families if their benefits were stolen through identity theft or typical card skimming practices.
That is a direct relief measure for vulnerable households. Then there is House Resolution 9371, which would require businesses to disclose when they are using personalized algorithmic pricing. This is a major issue as online retail and dynamic pricing models become more common.
And finally, House Resolution 9365 would direct the Secretary of Health and Human Services to establish an office to help communities provide mental health services to individuals who are experiencing fear-based trauma related to federal immigration law enforcement actions.
It is a wide-ranging set of bills. As we wrap up today's episode, what should our listeners keep their eyes on, Leanie?
Keep an eye on the budget debates surrounding House Concurrent Resolution 14 and the defense authorizations in House Resolution 8800. These will shape federal spending and national security policy for years to come. Also, watch for progress on the consumer safety front with the firearm reclassification in House Resolution 7499 and the local impact of the helicopter restrictions near the Statue of Liberty in House Resolution 3196.
That is all for today's episode of Capital Catch-Up. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.